by Juan Eugenio Hotzenbush. It is as sorry a matter to use words of whose meaning one is ignorant, as it is a blemish for a man of sense to speak of what he knows nothing about. I say this to those of you who may have the present story on your hands. However, often you may have happened to have heard Mariquita the Bald mentioned, and I swear by my doublet that you shall soon know who Mariquita the Bold was, as well as I know who ate the Christmas turkey, setting aside the surmise that it certainly must have been a mouth. I desire, therefore, to enlighten your ignorance of this subject, and beg to inform you that the said noted Maria, Mariquita is a diminutive of Maria, was born in the district of Segovia, in the town of San Garcia. The which town is famed for the beauty of the maidens reared within its walls, where for the most part have such gentle and lovely faces that may I behold such around me at the hour of my death. Maria's father was an honest farmer, by name Juan Lanas, a Christian old man and much beloved, who had inherited no mean estate from his forefathers, though with it but little wit in his crown, a lack which was the cause of much calamity to both the father and the daughter. For in the times to which we have attained, God forgive me if it is not necessary to have more of the knave than of the fool in one's composition. Now it came to pass that Juan Lanas, for the castigation of his sins, must needs commit himself to a lawsuit with one of his neighbors about a vine stock which was worth about 50 maravedis. And Juan was in the right, and the judges gave the verdict in his favor, so that he won his case, excepting that the suit lasted no less than 10 years, and the cost amounted to nothing less than 50,000 maravedis, not to speak of a disease of the eyes, which, after all was over, left him blind. When he found himself with diminished property, and without his eyesight, in sorrow and disgust, he turned into money such part of his patrimony as sufficed to rid him of the hungry herd of scriveners and lawyers, and took his way to Toledo with his daughter, who was already entering upon her 16th year, and had matured into one of the most beautiful, graceful, and lovable damsels to be found throughout all Castile and the kingdoms beyond. For she was white as the lily, and red like the rose, straight and tall of stature, and slender in the waist, with fair shapely hips, and again her foot and hand were plump and small to a marvel, and she possessed a head of hair which reached to her knees. For I knew the widow Sarmiento, who was their housekeeper, and she told me how she could scarcely clasp Mariquita's hair with both hands, and that she could not comb the hair unless Maria stood up, and the housekeeper mounted on a footstool, for if Maria sat down the long tresses swept the ground, and therefore became all entangled. And do not imagine her beauty and grace being such that she sinned greatly in pride and levity, as is the wont of girls in this age. She was as humble as a cloistered lay sister, and as silent as if she were not a woman, and patient as the sucking lamb, and industrious as the ant, clean as the ermine, and pure as a saint of those times, in which, by the grace of the Most High, saintly women were born into the world. But I must confess to you in friendship that our Mariquita was not a little vain about her hair, and loved to display it, and for this reason, now in the streets, now when on a visit, now when at mass, it is said she used to subtly loosen her mantilla so that the tresses streamed down her back, the while feigning forgetfulness and carelessness. She never wore a hood, for she said it annoyed her and choked her, and every time that her father reproached her for some deed deserving of punishment, and threatened to cut off her hair, I warrant you she suffered 3 times more than after a lash from the whip, and would then be good for 3 weeks successively, so much so that Juan Lanas, perceiving her amendment, would laugh under his cloak, and when saying his say to his gossips, would tell them that his daughter, like the other saint of Sicily, would reach heaven by her hair. Having read so far, you must know that Juan Lanas, the blind man, with the charge of district and dwelling, did not change his judgment, and if he were crack-brained at San Garcia, he remained crack-brained at Toledo, consuming in this resort his money upon worthless drugs and quacks, which did not cure his blindness, and impoverished him more and more every day, so that if his daughter had not been so dexterous with her fingers, in making and embroidering garments of linen, wool and silk, I promise you that this miserable Juan would have had to go far more than 4 Sundays without a clean shirt to put on, or a mouthful to eat, unless he had begged it from door to door. The years passed by to find Maria every day more beautiful, and her father every day more blind, and more desirous to see, until his affliction and trouble took such forcible possession of his breast and mind that Maria saw as clear as daylight that if her father did not recover his sight, he would die of grief. Maria thereupon straightway took her father and led him to the house of an Arabian physician of great learning, who dwelt at Toledo, and told the Moor to see if there were any cure for the old man's sight. The Arabian examined and touched Juan, and made this and that experiment with him, and everything prospered, and that the physician swore great oaths by the heel bone of Mohammed that there was a complete certainty of curing Juan, and making him to see his daughter again, if only he, the physician, were paid for the cure with 500 maravedis, all in gold. A sad termination for such a welcome beginning, for the 2 unhappy creatures, Juan and Maria, had neither maravedi nor cuarto in the money-box. So they went thence all downcast. Maria never ceased praying to His Holiness St. John and His Holiness St. James, the patron saint of Spain, to repair to their assistance in this sad predicament. In what way, conjectured she inwardly, in what way can I raise 500 maravedis to be quits with the Moor who will give back his sight to my poor old father? All. I have it. I am a pretty maid, and suitors innumerable, commoners and nobles, pay their addresses and compliments to me. But all are trifling youths, who only care for love-making, and who seek lighter loves rather than spouses, according to the law of the Lord Jesus Christ. I remember, notwithstanding, that opposite our house lives the sword-cutler, Master Palomo, who is always looking at me, and never speaks to me, and the Virgin assist me. He appears a man of very good condition for a husband. But what maiden, unless she were cross-eyed or hunchbacked, could like a man with such a flat nose, with that skin the color of a ripe date, with those eyes like a dead calf's, and with those huge hands, which are more like the paws of a wild beast than the belongings of a person who with them should softly caress the woman whom destiny bestows upon him for a companion. 'Tis said that he is no drunkard, nor cudgeller, nor dallier with women, nor a liar, and that he is besides possessed of much property and very rich. Pity 'tis that one who is so ugly and stiff-necked should unite such parts. Thus turning the matter over and over in her mind, Maria, together with Juan, reached their home, where was awaiting them an esquire in a long mourning robe, who told Maria that the aunt of the mayor of the city had died in an honest state and in the flower of her age, for she had not yet completed her 70 years, and that the obsequies of this sexagenarian damsel were to be performed the following day, on which occasion her coffin would be carried to the church by maidens, and he was come to ask Maria if she would please to be one of the bearers of the dead woman, for which she would receive a white robe, and to eat and ducat and thanks into the bargain. Maria, since she was a well-brought-up maid, replied that if it seemed well to her father, it would also seem well to her. Juan accepted, and Maria was rejoiced to be able to make a display of her hair, for it is well known that the maidens who bear one another to the grave walk with dishevelled locks. And when on the morrow the tiring women of the mayoress arrayed Maria in a robe white as the driven snow, and fine as the skin of an onion, and when they girt her slender waist with a sash of crimson silk, the ends of which hung down to the broad hem of the skirt, and when they crowned her smooth and white forehead with a wreath of white flowers, I warrant you that, what with the robe and the sash and the wreath, and the beautiful streaming hair, and her lovely countenance and gracious mien, she seemed no female formed of flesh and blood, but a superhuman creature, or blessed resident of those shining circles in which dwell the celestial hierarchies. The mayor and the other mourners stepped forth to see her, and all unceasingly praised God, who was pleased to perform such miracles for the consolation and solace of those living in this world. And there in a corner of the hall, Motionless like a heap of broken stones stood one of the mutes with the hood of his long cloak covering his head, so that nothing could be seen but his eyes, the which he kept fixed on the fair damsel. The latter modestly lowered her eyes to the ground with her head a little bent, and her cheeks red for bashfulness, although it pleased her no little to hear the praises of her beauty. At this moment a screen was pushed aside, and there began to appear a huge bulk of petticoats, which was nothing less than the person of the mayoress, for she was with child and drawing near to her time. And when she saw Maria, she started, opened her eyes a hand's breadth wide, bit her lips, and called hurriedly for her husband. They stepped aside for a good while, and then hied them thence, and when they returned, the mutes and maidens had all gone. While they were burying the defunct lady, I must tell you, curious readers, that the mayor and the mayoress had been married for many years without having any children, and they longed for them like the countrymen for rain in the month of May. And at last her hour of bliss came to the mayoress, to the great content of her husband. Now it was whispered that the said lady had always been somewhat capricious. Judge for yourselves what she would be now in the time of her pregnancy. And as she was already on the way to 50, she was more than mediocrely bald and hairless, and on this very same days had commissioned a woman barber, who lived in the odour of witchcraft, to prepare for her some false hair. But it was not to be that of a dead woman, for the mayoress said very sensibly that if the hair belonged to a dead woman who rejoiced in supreme glory, or was suffering for her sins in purgatory, it would be profanation to wear any pledge of theirs, and if they were in hell, it was a terrible thing to wear on one's person relics of one of the damned. And when the mayoress saw the abundant locks of Maria, she coveted them for herself, and it was for this reason that she called to the mayor to speak to her in private, and besought him eagerly to persuade Maria to allow herself to be shorn upon the return from the burial. "I warn you," said the mayor, "that you are desirous of entering upon a very naughty bargain, for the dishevelled girl idolizes her hair in such wise that she would sooner lose a finger than suffer one of her tresses to be cut off." "I warn you," replied the mayoress, "that if on this very day the head of this young girl is not shorn smooth beneath my hand as a melon, the child to which I am about to give birth will have a head of hair on its face, and if it happens to be female, look you, a pretty daughter is in store for you." "But bethink yourself that Maria will ask, who knows, a good few crowns for this shaving." "Bethink yourself that if not, your heir or heiress, begotten after many years' marriage, will come amiss, and bear in mind, by the way, that we are not so young as to hope to replace this by another." Upon this she turned her back to the mayor, and went to her apartment, crying out, "I want the hair! I must have the hair, and if I do not get the hair, by my halidom, I shall never become a mother." In the meantime, the funeral had taken place without any novelty to mention, excepting that if in the streets any loose fellow in the crowd essayed to annoy the fair Maria, the hooded mute, of whom we made mention before, quickly drew from beneath his cloak a strap, with which he gave a lash to the insolent rogue, without addressing one word to him, and then walked straight on as if nothing had happened. When all the mourners returned, the mayor seized hold of Maria's hand and said to her, "And now, fair maid, let us withdraw for a little while into this other apartment." And thus talking, whilst in motion, he brought her into his wife's private tiring-room, and sat himself down in a chair, and bent his head, and stroked his beard with the mien of one who is studying what beginning to give his speech. Maria, a little foolish and confused, remained standing in front of the mayor, and she also humbly lowered before him her eyes, black as the sloe, and, to occupy herself with something, gently fingered the ends of the sash, which girded her waist and hung down over her skirt, not knowing what to expect from the grave mien and long silence of the mayor, who, raising his eyes and looking up at Maria, when he beheld her in so modest a posture, devised thence a motive with which to begin, saying, "Forsooth, Maria, so modest and sanctimonious is thy bearing, that it is easy to see thou art preparing thyself to become a black-wimpled nun. And if it be so, as I presume it to be, I now offer of my own accord to dispose of thy entry into the cloisters without any dowry, on the condition that thou dost give me something that thou hast on thy head, which then will not be necessary for thee." "Nay, "Beshrew me, Mr. Mayor," replied Maria, "for I durst not think that the Lord calls upon me to take that step, for then my poor father would remain in the world without the staff of his old age." "Then now I desire to give thee some wise counsel, maid Maria. Thou dost gain thy bread with great fatigue. Thou shouldst make use of thy time as much as is possible. Now one of thy neighbours hath told me that in the dressing of thy hair thou dost waste every day more than an hour. It would be better far if thou didst spend this hour on thy work, rather than the dressing and braiding which thou dost to thy hair." "That is true, Sir Mayor," replied Maria, turning as red as a carnation. "But, look you, it is not my fault if I have a wealth of tresses, the combing and plaiting of which necessitates so long a time every morning." "I tell thee it is thy fault," retorted the mayor, "for if thou didst cut off this mane, thou wouldst save thyself all this combing and plaiting, and thus wouldst have more time for work, and so gain more money, and wouldst also give no occasion to people to call thee vain. They even say that the devil will some day carry thee off by thy hair. Nay, do not be distressed, for I already perceive the tears gathering in thine eyes, for thou hast them indeed very ready at hand. I admonish thee for thine own good, without any self-interest. Cut thy hair off, shear thyself, shave thyself, good Maria, and to allay the bitterness of the shearing, I will give 50 maravedis, always on condition that thou dost hand me over the hair." When Maria at first heard this offer of so reasonable a sum for this her hair, it seemed to her a jest of the mayor's, and she smiled right sweetly while she dried her tears, repeating, "You will give me 50 maravedis if I shave myself." Now it appeared to the mayor, who it is said was not gifted with all the prudence of Ulysses, that the smile signified that the maid was not satisfied with so small a price, and he added, "If thou wilt not be content with 50 maravedis, I will give thee 100. Then Maria saw some hangings of the apartment moving in front of her, and perceiving a bulky protuberance, she immediately divined that the mayoress was hiding behind there, and that the protuberance was caused by her portly form. Now she discovered the mayor's design, and that it was probably a caprice of his spouse, and she made a vow not to suffer herself to be shorn unless she acquired by these means the 500 maravedis needful to pay the Arabian physician who would give her father back his eyesight. Then the mayor raised his price from 100 maravedis to 150, and afterwards to 200, and Maria continued her sweet smiling, shaking of the head, and gestures, and every time that the mayor bid higher, and Maria feigned to be reluctant, she almost hoped that the mayor would withdraw from his proposition, for the great grief it caused her to despoil herself of that precious ornament, notwithstanding that by means of it she might gain her father's health. Finally the mayor, anxious to conclude the treaty, for he saw the stirring of the curtains, and knew by them the anxiety and state of mind of the listener, closed by saying, "Go to, hussy, I will give thee 500 maravedis. See once and for all if thou canst agree on these terms." "Be it so," replied Maria, sighing as if her soul would flee from her flesh with these words. "Be it so, so long that nobody doth know that I remain bald." "I will give my word for it," said the mayoress, stepping from behind the curtains with a pair of sharp shears in her hands and a wrapper over her arm. When Maria saw the scissors, she turned as yellow as wax, and when they told her to sit down on the sacrificial chair, she felt herself grow faint and had to ask for a drink of water, and when they tied the wrapper round her throat, it is related that she would have immediately torn it asunder if her courage had not failed her. And when at the first movement of the shears she felt the cold iron against her skull, I tell you it seemed to her as if they were piercing her heart with a bright dagger. It is possible that she did not keep her head still for a moment while this tonsuring was taking place. She moved it in spite of herself, now to one side, now to another, to flee from the clipping scissors, of which the rude cuts and the creaking axis wounded her ears. Her posture and movements, however, were of no avail to the poor shorn maiden, and the pertinacious shearer, with the anxiety and covetousness of a pregnant woman satisfying a caprice, seized the hair well or ill by handfuls, and went on bravely clipping, and the locks fell on the white wrapper, slipping down thence till they reached the ground. At last the business came to an end, and the mayoress was beside herself with joy, caressingly passed the palm of her hand again and again over the maid's bald head, from the front to the back, saying, "By my mother's soul, I have shorn you so regularly and close to the root that the most skilful barber could not have shorn you better. Get up and braid the hair while my husband goes to get the money and I your clothes, so that you can leave the house without anyone perceiving it." The mayor and mayoress went out of the room, and Maria, as soon as she found herself alone, went to look at herself in a mirror that hung there, and when she saw herself bald, she lost the patience she had had until then, and groaned with rage and struck herself, and even tried to wrench off her ears, which appeared to her now outrageously large, although they were not so in reality. She stamped upon her hair and cursed herself for having ever consented to lose it, without remembering her father, just as if she had no father at all. But as it is a quality of human nature to accept what cannot be altered, poor angry Maria calmed down little by little, and she picked up the hair from the ground, and bound it together, and braided it into great ropes, not without kissing it and lamenting over it many times. The mayor and the mayoress returned, he with the money, and she with the everyday clothes of Maria, who undressed and folded her white robe in a kerchief, put on her old gown, hid herself with her shawl to the eyes, and walked moaning to the house of the Moor, without noticing that the man with the hood over his head was following behind her, and that when she, in a moment of forgetfulness, lowered her shawl through the habit she had of displaying her tresses, her bald head could be plainly seen. The Moor received the 500 maravedis with that goodwill with which money is always received, and told Maria to bring Juan Lanas to this house, to stay there so long as there was any risk in the cure. Maria went to fetch the old man, and kept silence as to her shorn head, so as not to grieve him, and whilst Juan remained the physician's guest, Maria durst not leave her home except after nightfall, and then well enveloped. This, however, did not hinder her being followed by the muffled-up man. One evening the Moor told her in secret that the next morning he would remove the bandages from Juan's eyes. Maria went to bed that night with great rejoicing, for thought to herself that when her father saw her, which would be with no little pleasure, he would be pleased 3 or 4 times more if he could see her with the pretty headdress which she used to wear in her native town. Amidst such cavilation she donned the next day her best petticoat and ribbons to the Arabian's house, and while she was sitting down to shoe herself, she of a sudden felt something like a hood closing over her head, and turned round. She saw behind her the muffled-up man of before, who, throwing aside his cloak, discovered himself to be the sword-cutler Master Palomo, who, without speaking, presented Maria with a little Venetian mirror, in which she looked and saw herself with her own hair and garb, in such wise that she wondered for a good time if it were not a dream that the mayoress had shown her. The fact was that Master Palomo was a great crony of the old woman barber, and had seen in her house Maria's tresses on the very same afternoon of the morning in which he saw Maria was bald, and, keeping silence upon the matter, had wheedled the old woman into keeping Maria's hair for him, and dressing for the mayoress some other hair of the same hue which the crone had from a dead woman, a bargain by which the crafty old dame acquired many a bright crown. And the story relates that as soon as Maria regained her much-lamented and sighed-for hair by the hands of the gallant sword-cutler, the master appeared to her much less ugly than before. I do not know if it tells that from that moment she began to look on him with more favourable eyes, but I sooth it is a fact that upon his asking her to accept his escort to the Moor's house, she gave her assent, and the two set out hand in hand, the maiden holding her head up free from mufflers. As they both entered the physician's apartment, her father threw himself into Maria's arms, crying, "Glory to God! I see thee now, my beloved daughter. How tall and beautiful thou art grown! Verily, it is worth while to become blind for 5 years to see one's daughter matured thus. Now that I see daylight again, it is only right that I should no longer be a burden to thee. I shall work for myself, for as for thee, it is already time for thee to marry." "For this very purpose am I come," broke in at this opportune moment the silent sword-cutler. "I, as you will have already recognized by my voice, am your neighbor, Master Palomo. I love Maria, and ask you for her hand." "Lack a day, master, but your exterior is not very prepossessing. Howbeit, if Maria doth accept you, I am content." "I," replied Maria, wholly abashed and smoothing the false hair, which then weighed upon her head and heart like a burden of 500 weight. "I, so may God enlighten me, for I durst not venture to reply." Palomo took her right hand without saying anything, and as he did so, Maria looked at the master's wrists, and observed the wristbands of his shirt, neatly embroidered, and with some suspicion and beating of her heart said to him, "If you wish to please me, good neighbour, tell me what seamstress is this work?" "It is the work," replied the master jocularly, "the work of a pretty maiden, who for 5 years has toiled for my person, albeit she hath not known it till now." "Now I perceive," said Maria, "how that all the women who have come to give me linen to sew and embroider were sent by you, and that is why they paid me more than is customary." The master did not reply, but he smiled and held out his arms to Maria. Maria threw herself into them, embracing him very caressingly, and Juan himself said to the two, "In good sooth, you are made one for the other." "By my troth, my beloved one," continued the sword cutler after a while, "if my countenance had only been more pleasing, I should not have been silent towards you for so many long days, nor would I have been content with gazing at you from afar. I should have spoken to you. You would have made me the confidant of your troubles, and I would have given you the 500 maravedis for the cure of your good father." And whispering softly into her ear, he added, "And then you would not have passed that evil moment into the hands of the mayoress. But if you fear that she may break the promise she made to you to keep silence as to your cropped head, let us, if it please you, set out for Seville, where nobody knows you, and thus—" "No more!" exclaimed Maria, resolutely throwing on the ground the hair which Juan picked up, all astonished. "Send this hair to the mayoress, since it was for this and not for that of the dead woman that she paid so dearly. For I, to cure myself of my vanity, now make a vow, with your good permission, to go shorn all my life. Such artificial adornments are little befitting to the wives of honest burghers." "But rely upon it," replied the master cutler, "that as soon as it is known that you have no hair, the girls of the city, envious of your beauty, will give you the nickname of Mariquita the Bald." "They may do so," replied Maria, "and that they may see that I do not care a fig for this or any other nickname. I swear to you that from this day forth I will not suffer anybody to call me another name than Mariquita the Bald." This was the event that rendered so famous throughout all Castile the beautiful daughter of good Juan Lanas, who in effect married Master Palomo, and became one of the most honorable and prolific women of the most illustrious city of Toledo. End of Story 3.